This podcast is part of the Some Buddies Network. You're never alone when you've got some buddies.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons, or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as Mr. Most Days Off, and today we're going a little, what is that word I'm looking for? No beer and no TV make something. Whatever, we're going mad on this week's episode, but I'm not going mad alone. Once again, joining me as always, it is your co-host with the most, Richie the Whiz Kid. How you doing today, Rich?
I'm doing great, and I'm hearing some noises over there, which means I don't think we're alone today, Miles.
Oh, I thought you were just running your garbage disposal.
That's usually what I do at this time of the day, but we got a lot of fun stuff to talk about today, so let me throw it back to you, the man, the myth, the bony old behind. It is Miles.
Oh, thanks for noticing, man. And you are absolutely correct. We are not going at this one alone together here. Alone together? We're not going at this one alone. We are joined once again by our good friend and frequent guest at this point. Welcome back to the show to join us for the episode Mountain of Madness. It's Matthew Klickstein. Welcome back, Matt. How are you today?
Doing just fine. Very, very fine. Fine and dandy, like good candy, lemonade candy, French candy.
Nice. Right on, man. Well, sir, last time you joined us, I don't even remember what episode we discussed. I just know that you told us a lot of really fun stories from your visit to the Simpsons writers' room. And you've been a very busy man since that time, I do know. So you've got several projects in the works. Most frequent, the most on the brink of happening, I guess we should say. I think it'll be available when this episode drops. You just wrote a novel, sir. Please, go ahead and tell, because I've already forgot the name of it, and I'm so into it, is the thing. Nostalgia, a neurotic journey.
Very close, very close. First of all, the episode I was on last time was, I think it was the season 7 sort of wrap-up episode.
Yes, that's what it was. And that was the first time we've ever had a
just
guest for one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone's keeping track, that's the one. And then, yes, it's been a very productive year, probably the most productive of my life. Somehow it's still also been the year that I've made the least amount of money, but you do the math. But
it's funny how that works.
A few other things that have come out, the paperback version of Springfield Confidential with Mike Reese, of course, and the 5th anniversary edition of Slime, my Nickelodeon book. Both came out a couple months ago. Then I ghost wrote a book about the unlikely pop culture icon, Mr. Skin, who I was actually not familiar with until I worked on the book. It was an assignment, but a lot of fun.
I read that book, and I was very familiar with him prior to your writing.
Not something everyone wants to admit, but yeah, so that was a lot of fun. But coming up, in addition to my first comic book series coming out through Aftershock through the fall, it's called You Are Obsolete, if anyone's interested in that. The big thing right now is my novel. It comes out August 13th, so depending on when this airs, I think it will have just come out. Comes out in hardcover, distributed through Simon & Schuster, and very excited about it. It's something I've been picking at on the side for about a year and a half, and it really actually tells from a sort of very comedic, lighthearted, cartoonish voice, not surprisingly, a lot about sort of some of the adventures I've gone on and a lot of my friends have gone on who are in the pop culture historian world. A lot of my friends, like myself, write a lot of books about like I did Simpsons and Nickelodeon, some of these other things. I have friends who've written books about Mario Brothers and Food Network, Festivus, Back to the Future, Christmas Story, Pee-wee's Playhouse. There's sort of a little bit of an underground band of us. We jokingly call ourselves the Guardians of Pop Culture.
Nice.
And it includes people like my friend Alan Salkin, of course, Cassine Gaines, who's a big guy in the field, and just had a book about Dark Crystal come out. He's working on some new stuff right now. I don't think I'm allowed to talk about it, but some cool stuff is coming out from Cassine Gaines. But really, I've had all these great stories of kind of what it's like behind the scenes of some of these worlds at these Comic-Cons and these panels and, meeting some of these celebrities and a lot of the stuff that even you guys have been doing with your podcast. In a lot of ways, I see it almost as sort of a modern day Devil Wears Prada meets Almost Famous, if you will.
Oh, wow. I love one of those
so
movies. I'll let you guess which one.
so yeah, but it's a fun book. It's a comedy. The subtitle is a neurotic novel. There's a lot of craziness in it. I really wanted to have that kind of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas roller coaster ride experience. And it was something I did as a labor of love. It was a passion project for me while I was working on all these other things. I really wanted an opportunity to sort of tell a story of my own again for the first time in a while, because most of the books and writing I do is nonfiction. So most of my time is spent, as you guys know, having to do this kind of stuff too, finding the people, scheduling them, setting up interviews, getting the interviews going, editing stuff. It's not a lot of writing sometimes. It's a lot of busy work, which can be a bit frustrating. So it was just nice to sit down and start writing my own story and just really imaginating and fabricating this whole story, loosely based, of course, on some of my own adventures and the adventures of some friends of mine who do a lot of these kinds of things. And so I'm sort of showing what that's like on that other side of the velvet rope, so to speak. But it's a fun book. I'm really excited about what people are going to say about it when it comes out. August 13th, Selling Nostalgia, neurotic novel. As I like to tell people, of course, you can get it on Amazon, all that stuff online, but, please support your local bookstore. It's really great when people can do that. We really need bookstores around, just like we do with record stores and some of these other great little local stores where we can kind of hang out and talk to people about books and music and movies. So please support your local bookstore. Get it there if you can. So that's Selling Nostalgia, neurotic novel by Matthew Klickstein. Check it out. It's my first novel in, I think, almost 10 years. So I'm just excited to have something like that come out. We've already had some interest about possible film potential, of course.
Oh, wow.
So I'll keep you guys updated to that as well. It definitely translates very easily to film. It does have that kind of Almost Famous story arc, or you might not be the biggest fan of Devil Wears Prada, but I will.
No, actually, I can't stand Almost Famous. Yeah, no, no, kidding.
Good. But you know what? I do have to say, just real quick, and I've said this in a couple other little interviews. The book Devil Wears Prada is actually really, really good. The movie's a lot of fun. It has its moments, but it's somewhat unrealistic, of course, and it's a little bit silly. The book's actually quite good and really detailed. And one of the things I like about the book Devil Wears Prada, and that I really try to deal with in my book, Selling Nostalgia, even though it's a lot of fun, as is Devil Wears Prada, of course, there's some real underlining themes about what some of us, I think you guys included, and probably a lot of your listeners, what I like to call working class artists or working class writers or working class filmmakers. We're not the people who are living the high life in Brooklyn or Silver Lake. We didn't go to these private schools. We didn't grow up with, famous people around us. We, are struggling just to pay the bills, like I've been, even with some of these projects coming out. And in the Devil Wears Prada, the book, she really deals with that a lot more. The character and author, and I believe that book was somewhat autobiographical itself, but I was surprised how much she deals with just the money issue and how hard it is to live in New York and how hard it is to get into the industry she's trying to get into as a writer. And there's a lot more specific, nuanced ideas and stories and dialogue and characters that deal with, I'll just say, the classism of the media and entertainment industries today that really doesn't get talked about, I feel, enough. All the TV shows and movies we see when they take place in New York or in LA, they're not really worrying that much about money. And, there's really no TV shows on at all anymore where money's a big issue, kind of like Roseanne was back in the 80s, of course, and a couple of other shows, All in the Family or Sanford and Son or Good Times and TV shows like that. There used to be a lot of shows about blue collar families struggling to live. There really aren't any anymore. Once in a blue moon, you have some characters that are having some money issues, but not like back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I think that's a real shame. So that's a bit of what I deal with in the novel. Again, in a very fun, lighthearted way. It's not a bunch of rants and raves and some kind of political ideology or anything like that. But I do deal with, because it's something I deal with and a lot of my friends deal with in this industry, and it's part of it. When you're in the entertainment media industry, some of us have to deal with some money issues that most of the other people don't.
That's fascinating too. I'm so intrigued and can't wait to read this. But since you were just talking specifically about this concept of money struggles, I know another thing that's also near and dear to both of our hearts is Nickelodeon, and a lot of the complaints about what basically killed the Nickelodeon shows is we went from this era where it was like Salute Your Shorts and Hey Dude, where you had shows that those are not necessarily the greatest shows in the history of television by any stretch of the imagination, but it featured kids that were at least in believable roles. And then by the time you move into the 2000s, I mean, I didn't really watch at this point, so I can't really speak to them too directly, but like off the top of my head, I think there's like a show called like iCarly, which deals with a girl being Instagram famous essentially before that was the same. And like it puts these kids that were in these believable, relatable, like most kids went to some form of a camp, maybe not Camp on Awana, but they have that experience. And when you get to see that, it's a lot more interesting than seeing, you know, the kids that were born to the Kardashians that have no real life struggles. They're like, oh, I don't know if we should go to the concert or the movie premiere tonight. And it's just a lot more hard to connect with. So your novel, I mean, just already in that description, I can't wait to read it. That sounds awesome. Just getting to see a different side. One thing, because I've only known you as a documentarian, really. I mean, like Slimed, you know, interviewed so many great people involved with Nickelodeon. Springfield Confidential, the In Depth. I mean, we talked about that a lot last time with your visit to the Simpsons writers' room and just how much, I mean, just precious information you were able to get, and even your documentary on Mark Summers, which was absolutely amazing. So. Now going back to nonfiction, where you get to, or I'm sorry, going back to fiction, excuse me, where you get to have a little bit of fun. Tell us one of the biggest liberties that you took that you're just like, fuck it, I know this isn't real, but this is my world and I want to make it. Is there an example you can give that's something that genuinely made you excited to explore, even if it wasn't the most true thing?
That's a really good question, actually. But before I answer, just because it's so pertinent, not only to what we're talking about, but and a lot of the work that I've done just over most of my career now, which is, gosh, almost 20 years. I started really in my late teens. I deal a lot in the novel with what you're talking about. I even kind of make some references to Nickelodeon. These are things we all know, and I've talked about this in other interviews and even articles I've written about Nickelodeon. A lot of the themes come up even in Slime, because I talked to a lot of people from the older era, and they similarly lament the fact that, you know, there was this point where Nickelodeon went from, you know, this scrappy little channel where, you know, everyone was just trying to do the best they could, and both behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, you had some very, you know, average kind of people like us. People who, you know, might be a little fatter, might be a little bit not quite as camera friendly, had braces. You know, you had characters on You Can't Do That on Television who were cross-eyed. People who just looked like, you know, you and your friends, and were going through very kind of average type of things. Even I think one of the reasons we all love Pete and Pete so much is, despite the fact that it had this kind of magic realism sensibility to it and some cartoonish and absurdist aspects, you know, superpowers and things like that. At its core, every episode really dealt with a very average kind of thing. Eating, you know, chicken wings without getting messy, or you know, losing, you know, a tooth, or just some of these things that are just very, very, very normal and average, and not what Nickelodeon, as a lot of people have kind of complained or talked about or seen, and Disney too, and a lot of these other kids shows, more aspirational. So suddenly it went from being, you know, the kid next door to Hannah Montana, and she's secretly, you know, the superstar, or, you know, they're all superheroes, or whatever it might be, or living in these mansions in the sky, or, you know, you literally living at the White House, or whatever it is. You know, that became the big trend in the late 90s, early 2000s, and unfortunately it's kind of stuck through. You know, everyone's very special and unique, and I can understand where that's coming from on a confidence level and such, and that's great. Some of those programs, you know, have their place. But I do think one of the reasons why people like yourself and myself and a lot of probably your listeners connected so much with the Nickelodeon of the 80s and early 90s was, you know, it was average kids who looked average. And, you know, even DJ McHale, who I still remain very close with, the creator of Are You Afraid of the Dark, said the same thing. He said, look, when we were coming up with storylines for Are You Afraid of the Dark, you know, I always made sure, what's the story about the kids first? I don't want to just tell a story about a haunted taxi cab or a ghost who's haunting a house. Like, what's going on with the kids in the story? And he really wanted them to be, again, very average kids going through average things. And also there happens to be a monster outside the door. And, you know, they were doing that with every single show that they were creating at the time. Even in some ways, the cartoons. Obviously, Doug is a great example of that. These are just regular kids dealing with, oh my God, I suddenly look kind of fat, or, have a crush on the girl at school. Not, as you said, going to the movie premiere or meeting the president or whatever it is.
Right.
So that's really important. And that's something I talk about a lot in Selling Nostalgia too, because those are the kind of conversations that go on. Selling Nostalgia is definitely a book for the geek culture of today, for people who are into pop culture and fandom things. There's some criticism and it sort of pokes some fun on it. There's definitely some kind of comic book guy type fun that I have throughout, because, hey, that's what it's all about. We sort of make fun of ourselves and we criticize ourselves and what we're into, but ultimately there's a lot of love for that, and we ultimately embrace these things too. So I think it's really interesting you brought that up, and I just want to be clear about that. And sorry for all the rambling, but that's such a big part of a lot of the work that I've done over the years.
It's not rambling, it's passionate outpouring.
Yeah. I mean, I think, let's be honest, I think it's one of the reasons we love The Simpsons. Every character on that show is greatly flawed. Most of them are slightly overweight. They're balding. They look funny. They're weird. They're not the smartest kids in school. Lisa, even, who's a quote unquote genius, so to speak, she sometimes has confidence issues, or, turns out she's not the best person in school, or she's not the best saxophone player. They've done such a great job, even up till recently on The Simpsons, of really keeping the family relatively average, even when they go on these kind of crazy adventures and things to Denmark or outer space or whatever it might be. One of the things I really love about a show like South Park as well. And it's nice that there are still a few shows like that deal with that, but for the most part, there really aren't. And I kind of wanted to not only have a story that really comes from that place in Selling Nostalgia, but also, talk about these kinds of things, because those are the sort of things that me and my friends do talk about. We have these kind of conversations a lot. So that's the kind of stuff that shows up in Selling Nostalgia, an erotic novel. To answer your question real quick, same kind of thing as Pete and Pete. What did I take the most liberty with? There are, as realistic as I wanted the story to be, and as much as I wanted this to seem almost like a documentary of what it's like to be in my world, doing these kinds of books and screenings and documentaries and going to the conventions, I wanted to have some fun with it as well. And not just from the humor and some of the things that some of the characters are saying dialogue-wise, but every now and then there's little magical moments, there's little kind of cartoonish moments, little kind of references from a movie. There's a scene where a character is basically kind of floating across the ground, and it says sort of like, Nancy from The Craft, or the characters from Hocus Pocus. One of the things I was very inspired by, obviously, for a story like this, not so much Scott Pilgrim, but really the TV show Spaced on BBC, where Simon Pegg and Nick Frost and Edgar Wright came from. What I loved about Space is all those things that we're talking about right now. They're working class people. They're struggling with money. They're struggling with getting older. They're struggling with their love lives and just what it is to be a human being today and an average person. But also they're trying to make comic books and write books, and they're really into pop culture, and they're making references to movies all the time. And you could tell that the people who made the show, both the actors and the people behind it, like Edgar Wright, really love that stuff, because there are these kind of silly little moments with zombies or with cyborgs or aliens or whatever it is. And so that's kind of some of the fun that I had with Selling Nostalgia. So I would say probably one of the closest inspirations for my novel was just because of the way that they really deal with the reality of what it's like to kind of be leading these sort of lives right now, but mixed with a little bit of movie magic fun. And there's some vulgar comedy and some picaresque moments and some silliness, but there's also some real moments of heart as well. So it's one of the things I love about the show Spaced, and a lot of the movies that those guys put out, like obviously Shaun of the Dead is a really good example. And I just was trying to kind of do the same sort of thing with Selling Nostalgia. So that's what's going on with that book, man.
Very cool, man. We're very excited to read that, and we'll definitely promote it more as we get to the release date. Just a week away now, actually, as of yesterday, and as of this recording, just a few days ago. But we've already talked in the past that, you obviously clearly have a lot of influences that have gone into your worldview to write this novel. At least from the sense of humor standpoint, we know that The Simpsons had an influence, because we've discussed it in the past. And today we are here to talk about the episode Mountain of Madness, which originally aired on February 2nd, 1997. This one did not have a chalk gag. It did have a couch gag where we see Grandpa Simpson sleeping on the fold-out couch that is The Simpsons, or it's a bed, I guess. It's folded out. The Simpsons fold him up in it and sit nonchalantly as if nothing happened. This one has a very interesting commentary track because it features Josh Weinstein, the showrunner, Mark Kirkland, Dan Castellaneta, David Silverman, Matt Groening, and contest winner Jim Denton. Now, I'll be honest, I did a lot of research into trying to figure out who the hell Jim Denton was and what contest it was that he won. And it turns out that I'm just going to go ahead and tell you now instead of saving it for the end. Jim Denton was not actually Jim Denton, and there was no actual contest won. It was actually Second City television cast member Dave Thomas, who has been in all sorts of things. I mean, he's got one of the most recognizable faces, and he's been in just about every side role that you could possibly imagine.
Strange Brew, man.
Strange Brew is his top billing whenever you Google him, for sure. But this was just the guys on the commentary, and after listening to it, it's just, and the first time I had no idea what was happening, so I had to, the second time, after being in on the joke, you realize these dudes are just having a lot of fun. They're clearly friends. I imagine they're probably on the same soundstage, or he's in town for a show or something, who knows. But either way, they had a good time with the creation of this Jim Denton character. But it did not lead to what I would call a productive commentary track. With that said, we do start off the episode on a sunny morning where Mr. Burns is very pleasantly happy. He walks in whistling. Smithers there to greet him good morning. And he at first turns away coffee because he says that the promise of a new day is more than enough exhilaration for him. But then we get a sequence where we see just a few hours pass on the clock. It goes from being 8 to 11:30, and Burns is absolutely passed out on his desk.
Smithers, coffee.
But he takes just a sip, and suddenly he's rejuvenated. He jumps up, and I love the line. He yells out, "We need some excitement around here." And Smithers is like, "Chinese checkers or domestic, sir?"
No, something fun. Something the men will enjoy, like a safety drill. But what kinds? Meltdown alert? Mad dog drill? Blimp attack? I think a good old-fashioned fire drill today.
And we see that the Springfield nuclear power plant is basically the most ill-prepared facility on the planet when it comes to fires. Because, I mean, like, Carl thinks the popcorn's ready, and so when the alarm goes off, everybody goes into a panic. People are, like, losing their shit, hitting each other, causing more problems. One person actually hits another person with the fire extinguisher, which I particularly enjoyed.
You would think the safety inspector would be more on top of this.
To be fair, the safety inspector has his priorities straight. He knows he only has time to grab one personal belonging, and he immediately goes for the family photos. He has a selection of any number of options, but he picks his old-time cowboy photo of himself, and he actually has a heartfelt hug with it before he runs out of the building.
But he, to his credit, he does win. I mean, he's the winner.
He is the winner.
He definitely gets out before anyone else and makes sure to lock the door up behind him with the fence. And
he like panics when he gets out. Like, I don't know what to do. I also love the Smithers and Burns are timing it, and Burns is like, "Is it supposed to take this long? What's a good time for an evacuation?"
45 seconds.
And what's our time so far?
I don't know, sir. The stopwatch only goes up to 15 minutes. God. Damnation.
So this is where Homer comes out declaring victory, and again, he did win, potentially killing all of his co-workers inside.
You won more than you bargained for.
Mr. Burns is mad at everybody for not showing any teamwork, and Lenny and Carl get in a fight to prove that they did, in fact, have teamwork. One thing
You gotta love that. You gotta love their relationship in this episode. We're gonna see all sides of Lenny and only one of Carl being angry the whole time.
So according to IMDb, and just a little bit on the commentary, again, because it was a lot of just in-jokes, it feels like, but one thing that they did note was there's a lot of unusual pairing in this episode when it began, like the idea of obviously we're going to see Burns and Homer. We also had Smithers and the Simpsons children, who did, to be fair, team up for Malibu Stacy in the past, but not a common thing we see. But this was the first time that Lenny and Carl really were a, paired couple. We've seen them in scenes before, but this is where their relationship essentially stemmed. And according to IMDb, this is actually the starting point where we'll see them more as an on-screen duo moving forward in the rest of the series.
Well, did you see also, and Carl threw up a block on Lenny's swing? It had a great little sound effect on it, but I mean, Carl's legit. Watch out for him.
I did not see the block that he hit on the swing.
It was magnificent.
So, at the dinner table that night, Homer is explaining that now they all have to go to this stupid corporate retreat up in the mountains to learn about teamwork, which means they're going to have to cancel their plans to hang around.
Aw, teamwork is overrated.
Huh?
Think about it. I mean, what team was Babe Ruth on? Who knows?
Lisa and Marge are both like the Yankees, duh.
Sharing is a bunch of bull, too, and helping others. And what's all this crap I've been hearing about tolerance?
And we get probably one of the most iconic lines from this episode specifically. Homer just looks at Bart blankly and declares, your ideas are intriguing to me, and I wish to subscribe to your newsletter. By the way, subscribe to this podcast. Yeah, all the time, dude.
That is definitely one of the key. And it's funny, too, because I'm sure you guys know this, and I hope I'm not stealing any thunder, but from everything that I read about this episode, it kept coming up that Swartzwelder's script was rewritten countless times to a point where it was a completely different story or something. And yet, still, you have these great little lines like that, or the Chinese checkers are domestic, that, for me, read as somewhat Swartzweldering. So I don't know. It makes me wonder how much it really was rewritten, because, there seems like a ton of John Swartzwelder in this episode. But who knows?
I forgot to mention during the commentary, the writer was Swartzwelder, but he was unavailable for the commentary track. Now, they actually talked about it specifically. Honestly, they talked about this more than anything else in the commentary track, so I'll spend a moment on it. John Swartzwelder famously refuses to do the commentaries, to the point that the staff were trying out different ideas. And they were like, we'll drive up to your house. We'll bring the recording to you. You just have to talk. And he's like, no. Finally, David Merkin has the best story. He wasn't on this commentary, but Matt Groening told the story for Merkin. And basically, Merkin asked straight up, John, can we just record us asking you, will you please do the commentary, and you refusing to do it? And he said no to that as well.
That fits both of those guys so well. Just that little statement.
And more directly responding to what you just said, Matt, Josh Weinstein on the commentary did actually have this to say, regards of the rewrites. A Swartzwelder script is like a finely tooled, crazy German machine, and if you have the wrong engineers try to fix it, it blows up. And that's the thing, because it had great jokes, but we sort of changed the story and went through a bunch of drafts. The story was completely rewritten, and as a result, the plot became odder and quirkier, with the scenes of paranoia deriving from this.
I see.
It sounds like there was definitely some tinkering that was done on this episode, which I still feel like it came out really solid. This is a fun episode, but I would be really curious to see what it was before all the changes.
Yeah, and as I'm sure you guys also know, and I'm sure my co-writer on Springfield Confidential, Mike Reese, has probably told you, as other folks on the show, but Mike has always been adamant, and Al Jean and a few other people that I talked to for the book said the same thing. If you're writing a Simpsons episode, you better understand that it's going to be completely rewritten by the time it goes to air. Even Mr. Godfather Comedy himself right now, Judd Apatow, said that, they had an old script of his, as I'm sure you guys know, from about 20, 25 years ago. They decided to actually finally produce it all these years later. And Judd himself said, they completely rewrote it. But, he was happy about it. He said, it being as old as it was, it needed a lot of work and that kind of thing. And for him, it was almost like an honor. It's like you take this demo song and suddenly the best producers and musicians and session musicians and singers in the world are going to come and make it this huge hit. So he was actually kind of grateful and honored by that. But it seems like that is the case across the board anyway. So the thing about what I'm saying is it makes you wonder, why is that such a unique thing? Because you guys obviously saw it. I did too. It sounds like you talked about it in the commentary. Like that seemed to be a big issue about this particular episode, was how rewritten it was. And yet apparently that's what they do with every episode. So I do wonder what happened here to make that such an issue this round, when that's kind of what they do on the show, it seems like.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Though I have seen a handful of times where they pretty much do go virtually unrewritten. They make it out almost exactly how they started. But yeah, for the most part, I think that it's just, like you said, common knowledge that it's a writer's room and it's going to go through a lot of changes to get from point A to point B. Schwartzwelder may have been on more than one of those occasions, though, one of the writers that their script went through unfazed. So maybe he had written something that had a lot of intricate callbacks or setups or something. Again, I'm just speculating. But it is curious just because they don't usually talk about that on the commentary at all.
Yeah, and I don't know if this has come up too, or if you guys are aware of it. I imagine you are. I think it's pretty basic information for any Simpsons fan. But one of the things that was cool about going to the writer's room when I was on the Fox lot a couple of months ago and got to visit and everything, was they actually do have multiple writers' rooms, and it really goes through sort of a factory process. So, they have a specific room for the rewrites themselves, and it's a completely different group of people than the ones who are in the first writer's room. So they're kind of passing through, and they were actually working on two different scripts that I got to see, because they literally projected on the wall so everyone can kind of deconstruct it. So that just to kind of keep it going, they're working on multiple stories and scripts at the same time. And then when I went in for the reading that happened later in the week, I was invited to that as well, which was obviously an amazing experience. That was yet another story, another episode. So I actually saw them while I was there for just a few days. There were different rooms and different people working on 3 different episodes, and I'm sure they were working on others as well. But I mean, they are constantly fine tuning. And even when I was at the reading, and I'm sitting there with right behind Groening himself and James L. Brooks, and probably one of the greatest moments of my life was watching Nancy do the Nelson Ha Ha in person, like 3 feet in front of me. It was actually pretty cool. But the writers were there too. A couple of them I had seen from some of the rooms earlier, but there was also some people I hadn't seen yet. And they were sitting there the entire time. I'm sitting there laughing my butt off and also just amazed that I'm here. But they were just like students at a lecture writing down notes. I mean, they did not stop writing like the entire time. I don't think I saw Matt Selman or a couple of the other guys, Dan Greening, I think was there. I didn't see them lift their heads once. I mean, they were just making notes the entire time. So even by the time it gets to the reading, they're still making notes and making changes. So yeah, it is interesting. But I mean, I physically saw them working on 3 different episodes and really working on them and changing, which word to use, which line to use, and so they are doing that for sure. I mean, every episode must get changed dramatically from the original writing.
That's so cool. And again, you can actually hear Matt's full story describing all of the fun adventures he had while visiting the Simpsons writers' room. That was on our season 7 finale spectacular. And also, since Matt, you brought him up, we'll go ahead and announce too, guys. We did we've already had the conversation. The podcast is wrapped and just waiting to get out there for you. But we had the co-author of Springfield Confidential, Mike Reese. He also is a Simpsons writer. You may have heard of him, been around for a while. But he joined us to discuss Simpsons Califragilisticexpialidocious, which will be the next review after this one.
And if you ever have an opportunity to see Mike Reese speak in person, you should definitely do it anyway. I'm not just saying this because he's a time friend and because we worked on this book together. And, he's just been so generous and welcoming to me and a number of my friends. It was very nice of him to do your guys' show a bunch of times, as you know.
Oh yeah,
and I know
so
you guys
grateful.
are really grateful about that. Mike is so good about those kinds of things. He really is one of those people who loves the fans and is always up to do stuff like that. But he does this. Sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's 90 minutes, depending on the time. Sort of multimedia presentation about The Simpsons and his time at The Simpsons. It was a big help when we were putting Springfield Confidential together. But it is truly funny. It's laugh out loud funny. It's very interesting. He gets pretty deep and surprisingly honest about a lot of things, even his own work. He will sometimes also talk about his other shows like The Critic and Queer Duck. But one thing he gets into pretty deeply, both in our book and in his show, is the Sherry Bobbins episode of The Simpsons, which I'm not even going to pretend that I can pronounce. So if you ever have a chance, if he's ever in town or close to town, it's worth the 2 or 3 or even 4 hour drive if you need to go, if he's kind of close by, but not that close. It's a great show. His Q&As are always very funny, and he's happy to stay around and answer questions for folks. And all jokes aside, if you're not familiar with Mike Reese, he is literally now one of 2 people, just him now, who have written for the show since it started. He had a little time off in the middle when they were working on The Critic, but otherwise he's been with the series since day one. So he is one of those people who just knows. Probably, I'm going to go on a limb here, and maybe I get in a little trouble for saying it, but I'm going to say it. Probably knows more about the show even than someone like Groening or James LaProche, just because he's literally there so often. These days he's only there once a week consulting, but he's still there every single week for every single episode. And when he was still, there full time, I mean, it was constant. He ran 2 of the best seasons. So a lot to say about Mike Reese. Definitely go check him out, especially if you're into the Sherry Bobbins episode. And on top of all that, as I don't even know if you guys know, Richie and Miles, but Micah has a new book coming out, or that just came out also, a children's book. Turtle and Tortoise Are Not Friends. It's already getting a lot of really good reviews. I remember when he was working on it, talking about it. So I highly, highly recommend, if you are a big fan of The Simpsons and you're a big fan of Mike Reese and The Critic and some of the other things he's done over the years, check out Turtle and Tortoise Are Not Friends. A lot of people don't know this, but this was his 20th children's book. He's actually he's had quite a career in the children's book field. Yeah. One of them was even adapted into an ABC made-for-TV movie with the voice of Jason Alexander. That one's called How Murray Saved Christmas, about a Jewish deli owner who, through an odd series of circumstances, has to take over for Santa Claus one year. Oy vey, you can only imagine what happens when a Jewish deli proprietor becomes Santa Claus. So Mike Reese, check him out if he's ever around you, giving his shows. He's doing them constantly. He's been doing them for years. They really are quite fun. I've seen them like 10 times, and even when it's kind of exactly the same, I still crack up because he's got great delivery, and the jokes are truly funny, and it's very interesting. But yeah, and also you can check out Turtle and Tortoise Are Not Friends, his new children's book that literally just came out.
And yeah, we do go very in-depth into the Sherry Bobbins episode with Mike. He was very passionate, had a lot of fun things to say. And I'll just tell you, it turned into a 2-part episode, much like I feel this one might, which is totally fine. But for right now, we are going to move on to what's going on in this episode. We see that the Simpsons family is all bundled up and on their way to the snow-covered mountain, Mount Useful.
We the scorching hot desert last week too.
What's that?
Were we just in the scorching hot desert last week too for a few scenes?
Was that last week? I know we were during
the Twisted World of March.
Yes, You're totally right. Yeah, absolutely.
Get all 4 seasons in 1 week.
That's the magic of Springfield. It's silly. It's just a visual gag, but it had me literally laughing out loud every time I watched it. Homer tries to park the car in an icy parking lot, and he just plays bumper cars as he smashes off of. I'm pretty sure he eventually gets every single car in the lot at some point before he just comes to a stop in the middle of the lot, and the whole family gets out of the car nonchalantly, like it's fine. I don't know why that gets me every time. Mr. Burns.
The best game of that breakout game. You gotta hit every ball.
Yeah, and it just keeps coming right back to the paddle. Mr. Burns is sitting in front of what you can only describe as troops at this point. It feels very authoritarian, like it's very military in the way it's set up, because he's trying to drive inspiration of the team banding together. And he's talking about how dangerous and awful this is all going to be until he sees, oh, Simpson, you brought your family along? I thought I was supposed to, sir.
They could just wait in the visitor center.
But, Marge is like, look on the bright side. Don't worry. This is a national park. We can have lots of fun.
Oh, I'm afraid that's no longer true, ma'am. Budget cutbacks have forced us to eliminate anything the least bit entertaining. Well, see ya.
The Ranger character is actually based off of, at the time, Vice President Al Gore. They did apparently reach out to Al Gore to actually do the role, but they were not able to get him on the show. But we do know Al Gore did go on to do Futurama in the future, so I don't.
He was probably busy fighting Man Bear Pig.
It was probably his. It was probably his long fight with Man Bear Pig. You're right. So they explained that they're all going to pair off into 2-man teams, and they will be competing to get to a cabin hidden somewhere on the mountain. It's going to be treacherous, and they're going to have to use their maps.
I lost my map.
Smithers explains, you haven't been issued a map yet. Smithers continues, when you arrive at the cabin, there will be a congratulatory party with sandwiches and moderately priced champagne.
Ooh, yay. Now, as an added incentive, the second to last team to arrive at the cabin will receive a hilarious world's worst employee trophy.
Hey, this sounds like fun.
And the last team to arrive will be fired.
And that's when everybody realizes, well, Homer actually giggles for a bit and then realizes that maybe this isn't all fun and games. Because, I mean, let's be real, Homer in a foot race probably has low odds.
I don't know. Sometimes he can run for quite a long time. I mean, when he had that strange journey to climb up all those stairs, he did a pretty good job, but that was all in his head, kind of.
Yeah, I don't know if that counts. He really just visited the gift shop.
That was a really high up there gift shop.
Or pro shop for the golf course, or whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, and Burns isn't playing around either, because he says that him and Smithers are going to be participating as well, so it looks like Mr. Burns is getting fired.
That's true. They're putting everybody's names in the hat, and they have to draw names to decide who their partner is going to be. First up, they draw Lenny and Carl.
Nuts. I mean, nuts.
That's such a great bit where there's just, it looks like Carl's going to try to but then just looks him dead in the eye and shows his displeasure again. It's wonderful.
Trouble in paradise.
We get a few more names of people that we've never heard of, like Fong and Zoo Troy, Kimball and Dawson, Haney and Drucker, and then Simpson and Burns?
Oh.
And then Homer has one of those famous conversations with his own brain.
Wait a minute. You're going to be with Mr. Burns. You can't possibly get fired.
Smithers is upset, though, because he was told that the drawing was rigged and he would for sure be with Mr. Burns.
Yes, well, frankly, you've been a bit of a pill lately.
Why do we always fight on vacation? That's such a good line. I read an article not too long ago. It talks about how, it's something to do with, the raised tension and stress. It's very, very common that people get into fights on vacation when they should be having, a good time with one another. And I think that this is just a really simple, but very, very great joke. Everyone's had this experience.
That means there's only one name left, though, that hasn't been picked for a team yet, so that means instant victory.
And the person that's going to be paired with Waylon Smithers is Waylon Smithers. Perfect. That's just perfect. We see that they all line up at the starting point, and Mr. Burns actually fires a gun into the air to start the race, which causes him to sink several feet into the snow. Everyone takes off running. But Homer's like, are you ready, sir? And Mr. Burns actually shoots the gun downward to pop himself back up onto the starting line.
I really enjoyed
Brilliant
that
side
animation.
gag. Oh, yes, absolutely. And that actually brings us to the end of our first act as the employees are fighting or racing, I should say, for their career. Unfortunately, Matthew Klickstein had to step out and was not able to finish the review of the episode Mountain of Madness, but we had such a good time talking about Act 1 with him and discussing his brand new novel available right now, Selling Nostalgia. No worries, of course, Richie and I will be back again next week, and we will be finishing up both Acts 2 and Acts 3, getting into the real madness of the episode, Mountain of Madness, and even more great news, as we discussed in this episode, we will be having Mike Reese on for Simpsons Califragilisticexpialidocious just the following week after. So we have a lot of very exciting things happening on Best Darn Diddly. For now, though, thank you so much for joining us on this journey through The Simpsons, the Golden Age and beyond. Please make sure you follow the show at Best Darn Diddly. You can follow Richie the Whiz Kid at TheWhiz_Kid23, and I am at Mr. Most Days Off. Come back next week for the conclusion of Mountain of Madness. And of course, until next time, be cromulent to each other.